As some of you may know, I used to be a math instructor at a community college. One of the things that the Dean of Students talked about during meetings was this Achieving the Dream initiative that they were trying to implement. Basically, she said that there's an achievement gap between white students and African American students, and the goal of Achieving the Dream is to narrow this gap. This blows my mind on so many levels. In this video, I'm going to talk about the questions and concerns that I had about this that I wouldn't dare ask unless I wanted to get chastised for dare questioning this. First of all, by how much should the gap be narrowed? Surely you don't expect performance outcomes to be exactly equal, or do you? If not, how small should the gap be? And who decides that? And how do they determine that the gap is small enough? Who are they to say that the achievement gap should only be this arbitrary amount? Second of all, why is having an achievement gap between two groups of people a problem anyway? You can't expect performance results to be equal between two arbitrary groups of people. You're naturally going to have some smart students, or ones who may be better test takers, and you may likewise have some students who aren't. We're not supposed to be equal in this regard. Stop looking at averages and start looking at individuals. They group students by skin color, but couldn't you also group them by eye color and hair color? If you did that and found, to nobody's surprise, an achievement gap between blue-eyed students and hazel-eyed students, or blonde students and dark-haired students, shouldn't we close that achievement gap as well? I would say no, just like we shouldn't when they're grouped by skin color. Third of all, if there are any academic areas where whites underperformed compared to blacks, you can safely say that they wouldn't care in the slightest about trying to close that gap, even if that achievement gap was wider. One question I would have loved to ask was, if we narrowed this achievement gap so much to the point where we've reversed it, would we want to then close this new gap, or would you consider it to be a victory? Fourth, did you try to find out why there might be this achievement gap? Could it be possible that in comparison to white students, black students on average miss more classes, or show up late to class more, or leave class early more often? Or maybe we could look at age groups. Older students might perform better than younger students because they tend to be more responsible and take their studies more seriously. And perhaps when you took the average of the white students, they had more of the older students while the black group had more of the younger students, thereby being a contributing factor for the achievement gap. But nope, they don't even look into these possibilities. It's easier for them to simply say that the teachers are pretty much all racists and don't know it. You know, college campuses love to cram the word diversity down your throat. I thought they were aware that everybody is different, yet they expect performance averages to be the same, even though you're averaging out a big mixed bag of diverse students. Or could this be further evidence that when you hear the term diversity, they only mean race? Even though they claim that diversity is about more than just race. If they really believed that, you would think that they'd recognize more diversity within these two student groups. But nope, they decided to only divide the students out by race and didn't bother to dig into anything else. Fifth, how exactly do you expect the teachers to help close the gap? Unless you want the teachers to give the black students easier exams than the white students, or you want the teachers to give the black students 10 extra points on all exams, I don't see what could be done. The dean certainly didn't go into any specifics on this. Sixth, and I kid you not, but the dean actually said that if all students' performance goes up by the same amount, that's not what she wants because we will still have the gap. How far has political correctness gone, where if everyone performs better, they'll find a way to put a negative spin on it? So basically, if whites start to underperform, that would lower the gap. According to the dean, that would be better than everyone improving, since that scenario would help narrow the gap. Either that or have black students outperform the white students by a higher margin. But reverse the races when trying to say that and see how that goes. And lastly, I noticed that she said African American to refer to the black students, but she had no problem using white to describe the white students. If black is a politically incorrect word, then why not white? This is what the Achieving the Dream Equity Statement looks like on their website. Community colleges are an indispensable asset in our nation's efforts to ensure and preserve access to higher education and success for all students, particularly students of color, low-income students, and other historically underrepresented student populations. However, student access and success in higher education continue to be impacted by the effects of structural racism and systematic poverty. Oh dear. Achievement gaps among student groups reflect structural inequalities that are often the result of historic and systematic social injustices. Oh my. These inequalities typically manifest themselves as the unintended or indirect consequences of unexamined institutional or social policies. So basically, the teachers in the school, although they have good intentions, are racist and don't even know it. I don't see how, whenever I taught my students and I'm up there teaching and assuming they were all paying attention, that if I said anything, then everybody heard the same thing. Everybody was taught the same thing and was taught the same way. So no structural racism there. Achievement gaps reflect structural inequalities? Really? Such as what? No, achievement gaps reflect the fact that you can't just use arbitrary averages and claim racism without looking at other averages. If you found that one group of people is underperforming compared to another group, then you should really look at other stats such as how did these same two groups compare in terms of time spent studying, number of absences, average number of days late, average days leaving early, average ages in each group, and so on. But I'll bet they didn't do that. This is political correctness. If there's ever a situation where women as a group are underperforming compared to men on average, like the wage gap, or blacks are underperforming compared to whites, like the achievement gap, then we can't say it's anything that they themselves did or didn't do on average. No, we wouldn't want to do that. But rather, we must blame society. It must be somebody else's fault. It's a lot easier to simply say, well, they're all just a bunch of sexist racists and don't even know it. The next paragraph is your typical leftist rhetoric. It talks about how education is a right as opposed to being a privilege, which it actually is, as you have no right to someone else's time. And it talks about democracy, and last I checked, we're a republic, since nowhere in the Constitution does it say democracy, but it says republic multiple times. But reading on, achieving the dream expects colleges to dismantle the barriers facing underserved students. Colleges must routinely scrutinize structural barriers to equity and invest in equity-minded policies, practices, and behaviors that lead to success for all students. Or, how about instead of worrying about this equity crap, how about have colleges let students be responsible for their own success, like the adults that they're supposed to be at this point? Of course you want all your students to be successful, but it's ridiculous to have to segregate them out into groups like this. Just do it at the individual level. And they said underserved. How so? Society already bends over backwards for women and minority groups. There are student organizations exclusively for them. And if you dare even think about creating a white student union like this gentleman did, you're done for. There are scholarships that only women can be eligible for, or that minorities can only be eligible for. If anyone is underserved, it's white male students. They don't have anything like that. Bottom line, you can't just look at one average. This is just like the wage gap where they only look at the average salary between men and women, but they don't look at average number of hours worked, average days off, career choices, percent of workplace deaths, etc. Looking at other relevant averages will give you more of an understanding of why there is an achievement gap or a wage gap. But they don't do that. It's easier for them to simply look at just one average and automatically blame it on racism or sexism.